was actually okay,
Cool.
and finally granted rights. When you think about it, that's what's kind of wild. I always kind of ask students, like, when were you born? You know, and you were born after, you know, mostly after the time where the environment was given rights, and you kind of assume all that. And it's like, actually, if you're born when I was born, the environment didn't have rights. So the reason that's significant is that I have found is that I've worked with a lot of the decision makers are my age, right? So they have a certain, it's different than a generation that has, you know, been literally born into environmental rights. So I learned how to craft my try to craft my how I talk to folks depending on where they are in terms of this regard for the environment. You can't assume that everybody's on board. And so the regulations came into place, but the problem is that the regulations were there, but the actual kind of like the laws were there, but the regulations that really talked about how things were practiced in terms of the environmental remediation, et cetera, were really flawed, totally flawed. I have to say I became infuriated by the very myopic remediation technologies that I should just kind of say in a phrase is it was all about, and I'll talk about the definition of remediation, all about cleaning up, but it was also about making it go away. You know, it wasn't about actually kind of like addressing it. So that was not making me happy. So and it also, there was nothing within the regulations that were talking about how the local communities would be engaged in this process. Nothing, you know, like some kind of patronizing stuff, but nothing was significant. So this was really important to me. When I found in this old program called Spell Check, when I put in remediation, it would come up with the word redemption. I was like, really, right? So it was all about this idea of, you know, correcting a fault, you know, which put everybody kind of like in the defensive mode, denial, and all of that. So that's when I really was like, I'm not going to use that word. You know, I will when I have to speak to the EPA, but my preference is regeneration. Because regeneration, right, its synonym is transformation, and it's about creating a new. So it's talking about, which you'll hear obsessively here, is about kind of moving forward with cycles. So hold on. So here are my kind of like directives, you know, in terms of all of these situations. Like what would I say if I'm up against this these obstacles? And I would say embrace the complexity of it. They're not simple. It's difficult, but it's great. Challenge very limited engineering solutions and approaches, and give form for the neighbors to witness that transformation so that they understand. So in the case of Joe Ragsdale, student, they were working on taking all of this kind of like ridiculously complex data and trying to map it out to kind of show it spatially and functionally, so that and make it. There's another map, you know, after translating it for the community. You know, because the EPA would sit up there and go, well, OU1 and OU2 is like over here, and this is, you know, what? You know, you just like, they would not know. So there was an important idea of spatializing and translation. So, and then meanwhile, this is like a long time ago. Before now, I think it's commonplace to talk about biotechnologies. This was this is the kind of the case where it's like I knew in this woman's head, she had all of these critters in her head, and they were bigger than life, but in her head, but they're that big. And I said, draw them big. And I just said, so she's like, this is her talking about, look at this ecology that if there's biotechnologies that are in sync with the ecosystem along the floodplain of the Shenandoah, these kind of great, there's this synergy between the reclamation and the ecosystem. This is also another instance that I just wanted to show you of this kind of quagmire of data, just the kind of like roll over your eyes, you know, like there's the list of all sorts of contaminants, which, you know, Sarah can tell you I would require everybody knew what that contaminant was, what kind of damage did it do to humans and the environment, and what kind of remediation, you know, regeneration technologies there could be. So it was a lot of work. So it was a lot to know. But you know, then you're like, look at this map. Can you imagine communities looking at this? They're just like, what? You know, and then there's the, you know, color-coded map. And then there's the reality of it, right? In the aerial. That red waterway, that is not photoshopped. That is the color, you know, of that waterway. You know, that's fun to work with. And then really on the ground, there it is. It's truly that blood red. It's acid rock drainage here in the diversion tunnel. And then the other part of this is the kind of I always call it the, you know, the collateral damage, right, of the industry. So the furnaces would, you know, just denude. In this case, it was 50 square miles in Ducktown, Tennessee, that were denuded of vegetation, you know, and so that's what their soil looked like. I always like to point out here that this is really interesting. To me, it was really interesting that when I was there and talking to folks, they actually had grown to love this landscape because it was theirs. We love them their bald, he said bare hills. They said it very fast. I can't say it. But there was and that was like a really, this was a pretty early project. That was a pretty early cue of how these are cultural landscapes, right? That they have value, even if they look like an ugly duckling. You know? And that was something to build on, to build, you know, with, you know, and not deny and not kind of say, oh, you want that green painting, you want, you know, a green wash, which wasn't true. They don't want it. Vittendale. Vittendale Reclamation Project. This is actually the seminal project that I was involved with. It was right at the beginning of when I founded Dirt Studio. So I got this amazing call to collaborate with an artist, a historian, and a hydrogeologist. And we were working in southwest Pennsylvania in coal mining. And this is what the landscape looked like. So the psychedelic. I once fell like up to my neck. It was bright orange for a little while. So, but this is just this kind of montage that I put together to very, very simply talk about this. And this is where I have to say what I began to really love about working on this stuff was the learning. You know, I didn't know anything about acid mine drainage, you know, and we went on a total crash course, you know, with Bob Deason, and he was showing us where, you know, the acid mine drainage comes out of the tunnels, you know, and it just releases into the waterways, and it drops out heavy metals, and it's acidic, like 2.9 pH, you know, and then, but through, well, I'll show you the sequential alkaline producing system. There is this very simple engineering to have the water come out, that rich, biologically rich green water. This was so we looked at a lot of sites, and we decided upon Wittendale to be the prototype, you know, that it was going to be the demonstration project. So we really like documented us working on this a lot and disseminated it. This was 40 acres. These are coke ovens, and they stretch 1,400 feet along the floodplain. And as you can see, they're starting to denude all of the vegetation. Black Lake Creek is running along the bottom of the there, and it was gray and orange from acid rain drainage. And I always like to I love showing this image because you'll see, you'll talk about coal mines and everybody thinks, oh, that's great, we just walked in there, you know, but this was the Kitani B seam. And the Kitani B seam, as you can see, was only about 3 feet high. And they crawled. And in some cases, we read in the history, they would crawl 45 minutes to the working face. Now there's a commute. That is worse. That's worse than Northern Virginia. Maybe. I don't know. Just went through it. But anyway, it gives you, all of a sudden you're looking at these tunnels, and they're kind of empty in your brain. But the minute you fill it up with hundreds, in this case of hundreds of men and boys, because we did this plate, Stacy and I did this etched plate, where it's hard to discern, but we've numbered the number of folks. And just look at the scale of this. This is a partial part of mine under that hill. There's this long coke works here, and then here's the community. You know, so it's, you know, working on industrial sites is it's mind-blowing in many dimensions, but scale is one. Now this was really fun too, really great. So this is Bob Deason, the engineer, working and drawing, how would the passive treatment system work on this floodplain? And this is Stacy and I drawing. And you can see we're interpreting what Bob is saying, you know, because he's doing this thing of you know, he's saying, well, he was explaining this, it comes down and it gets more alkaline, and then it goes to the next basin, and So we then started to think about this thing, well, why couldn't it be like a litmus garden? So we were anticipating trying to translate it so that it was a form that folks could maybe understand, right? And sweetheart, we gave him an artistic license. It's and we laminated it, you know, we're Bob, you know, you're the best, because at first he wouldn't draw it. You know, he's like, no, I'm come on. So it was great. And I have had the best time in the world forcing engineers and scientists to sit next to me and draw, you know, and we just draw together, you know, it's great. So this is a more fancy pants, you know, finished site plan, but basically there are 3 components of it. So here's where we pick up, before the acid mine drainage would go into the Black Lake Creek, we pick it up in this pipe, and then it would go down through the litmus garden, right? And through here, and then it would go into the marsh where we did this earthworking at the scale of the old colliery, the coke ovens, which was really kind of the final rinse, because then the release was right up here. And then this was an upland area that was kind of there already to give something to the town, to be next to this. And the cool thing is that this was a regional bike trail. So a lot of people would come past this. So, and they would all learn about the passive treatment system. So, and this was another beautiful thing that I said, Bob, can you send me the whole list here? And you can see it starts rainfalls and where it goes through this whole system, and then it comes out rainfalls. I cried when he sent me this. And then you can see there are a bunch of earth venues, and it's simple, but it's simple. But there's the details of it. The stripes represent. This was this kind of goofy thing we did with the litmus garden, where the plants that we put there were reflecting the process. So some turned bright red. You know, it was kind of fun too. Silly. There it is, under construction. You can see the scale of it. This is a wonderful AmeriCorps volunteer that worked with us, and we actually bartered with a excavator, because he sculpted this in exchange for taking away the byproduct called bony that still had fuel down. There it goes. It's starting to go to work. The folks at Bittendale really wanted in, so they wanted to expand the fitness garden. It was great. And there you see, I want to know by looking at this photo that it's like, you know what? If I sent this to the ASLA, I would not get into design. But you know what I would say? I don't care. That thing is working, right? There it is. It's working. Okay. The second. Next shift. Okay. The Bittendale project really challenged that kind of linear approach that conventional reclamation technologies take instead of this kind of more cyclical process of transformation. So this drawing by absolutely one of my heroes, the artist Robert Smithson, he had the same way early on, in the 70s before he died. He made the argument, also made the argument that reclamation laws were like, saying put Humpty Dumpty back together again. It's just like they're silly. So, and in this drawing, he's actually proposing that this Bingham pit not be reclaimed, which would say it would all be filled Humpty Dumpty, that it actually would be celebrated in terms of its ambition. And I love him because he likes ugly ducklings. And he is from New Jersey. So his writings really always push me to think about regeneration generated by cycles, that to engage site processes, especially in working landscapes, is basically what I call taking the next shift, right? Because it's like, we went to Bittendale and we took the next shift. We weren't like saying, oh, we're going to clean up after you. It's an idea about the work continuing. So I always like to say that designing a course of action allows for a very provisional nature of landscapes, that we acknowledge their logic and not ours necessarily. So, I would ask for myself and everyone to take the next shift, kill them with knowledge. I love doing that. It's like, all these folks I've worked with, they're like, well, you don't know anything about that, Missy. I'm like, yeah, actually I do. And we would show them all of our research. So, push processes, not things. I'm always saying that, design is more of a verb than it is a noun. Form is a verb, not necessarily just a noun. Question motives. This is always tricky to do with clients, and it's something to learn to do. And I would just say it's all about putting questions into context so that they can understand where they're, where we're not there making their decisions in what context. And I would always say the question, off the back up, got in a lot of trouble. So, here's a student, Jennifer, they're so adventuresome, and they just really trouble with how we were just talking about before. How do you follow? How do you show processes and time? And here she's got her reclamation, regeneration wheel that she worked on. And it was the Middle Branch project that she was working here. And then meanwhile at DIRT, we struggled with a client and a community. And in this case, I was, I'm not even supposed to say this, I signed an NDA, but I don't care. This is Harvard, my alma mater, I'm allowed to say it. Harvard's development group was about to gobble up, Cambridge's, ugly duckling, modest working town of Alston. It's just across the river. So Cambridge is to the upper right where it says early draft. So, we were doing our best to outsmart these developers, they thought we didn't know how to read soil maps, like you see here. We're obsessively cataloging the soils here. So that was new to them, because then we came in with this graphic of showing them how many hundreds of trucks would be barreling through the neighborhood streets of Alston. Ooh. Yeah, they kind of went, oh.
Clever.
And this is where it's like, question motives. Sometimes all you have to do is show a little graphic, just saying, this is what's happening here. So, and what we did, what we said is, why not treat the soil? It was all pretty dubious, some good soil, some not, but at an abandoned Sears manufacturing site, and use it locally, but also reuse it at any number of Harvard properties. And we called it the Dirt Dance. It's a jumbo operation of cut, treat, and fill. And in the end, we got a little pat on the head and told to go away. Oops. Sorry, we showed you that. But we tried again. We tried again at Ford, with Ford Motor Company. I did this project with Bill McDonough, also with Nelson Berg-Woltz. You can see the engineers. And also, this was a case where I said, no, if we're going to do this, we need a scientist and a historian to make sense of this. This was their Y2K, their big campaign at 2000. See, this is what's kind of like, really kind of like, I think kind of weird, but maybe shouldn't think it's weird. We showed them these images. We're like, you are a cultural landscape, all caps. I mean, we're talking Charles Sealer, Diego Rivera, and you are the American icon, so there's a certain value invested in this plant. Whereas this one guy used to stand there like a robot. We'd say, we'd ask him about an Albert Heijn building. There were beautiful Albert Heijn, and he goes, it's inactive, and we'd be like, what? So this is kind of what you're up against. So this was like the drawing after we landed, about an idea, my scribbles about this kind of regenerative plant, and ideas about industrial gardens along Miller Road, which was the really important thoroughfare that's open, that is visible from the public. So it's just trying to get these juices flowing about the possibilities of how could we show it as a living regenerative plant. Miller Road is turned this way right now. And basically, you can see we're conceiving it in kind of three ways of the future of the assembly plant that Bill Newfeni designed. And then the present was about trying to kind of come to terms with some kind of community relationship there. And the past, which you'll see, dirt became obsessed with where the old coke ovens were. But basically, this was not a master plan, which, you know, I'll go on about later, but it was like more like an action plan or a landscape framework where they could kind of start to build pieces upon it, but had the kind of bones and the systems in place. Also hammering home the idea that this was a very complex layered landscape, cultural landscape. By the way, that's Bonnie and Clyde right there. And these were the coke ovens that we gravitated to on the southern edge of end of Miller Road. And there's where it's they're idle, well, they're abandoned. The coke is coming from China now. And we said, what if, you know, what if there's a couple things? One, we curate the coke structures themselves, the coke ovens, and juxtapose them with the regenerative technology of phytoremediation, which at that point was quite nascent. And so that's when we brought in two people that helped us with that. The value of the coke ovens in and of themselves wasn't great, but Larry Langton, our historian, made the point of like, these are the coke ovens that were part of the first integrated manufacturing plant in the world. So Ford, you take these away, you wipe out part of your legacy. You choose, you know. And then Clayton Rue from Michigan State University, it was great that he was right there. We brought him out of the basement, his basement lab, and he said, I'll love it if I have a field, you know, to do a laboratory outside. So that's what it looks like. It was from Miller Road. Ford got all sorts of press out of it. Oh yeah, like woohoo, you know, we're so good. And this is so funny because I think about the head of the environment, his name was Jerry Amber, who used to wince every time I came in the room. You know, when the more I just kind of talked about the intention between each thing, and the more we showed them that we understood the coke ovens, and we understood what polyaromatic hydrocarbons were, you know, and that he was under a lot of pressure from the EPA and blah, 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 blah. So he came along, and I like to tell the story that like a few years later, I was invited to a Wildlife Habitat Council conference to speak with Jerry Amber. And he spoke about this project as if it was his own. You know, I was like, great. Trying to show that to the ASLA for the work. Anyway, here we go, 3, just ground. So you can imagine that once you learn about toxic soils, it's hard to look at any dirt the same way. And when you translate all that data that I was talking about to locate the pollution, you really start to see who is in harm's way. It basically comes down to where a dear friend of mine, late friend, used to say when I was going off to a project, she said, Julie, Miss Julie, are you going off to deal with some more poor soils and poor people? Yeah, I am. And that is unjust right. But still the habit of, you know, don't dig, don't treat, and don't tell, it continues. And if the soil is still tested, then this cleanup will, you know, will kick in. So, so what is the landscape architect to do in this instant? And of course, you got to try to do the right thing. And you've got to champion, if you've got kind of seen like how I talked about Miller Road and about Bittendale, it's all about transparency. It's all about making this legible, you know, so people can see it and feel it. and to cultivate empathy. I remember it took me actually quite some time. Like I hated Jerry Amber as much as he hated me at first. And then I just realized, you know what, dude, you were up against a lot of stuff. You know, so like, and then you can see I'm always into science as a superhero. So a project in let me see. Project in New Orleans. Love that city with the artist Mel Chin, brilliant man, and again with a toxicologist, a scientist, and in this case, the UVA graduate students worked on this. This graphic is, let me explain this graphic. It's something Mel did, and it basically tells the story about how you'll see in the maps that I'm going to show that this is of leaded soils, leaded, poisoned, polluted soils, and the city's map, and then of course you probably know her, Katrina. And his point in this was that, well, let's talk about the disaster before the disaster. There it is. Yummy. Okay, this is when you do your homework, and Sarah remembers this. I would be like, okay, what's, you know, what parts per million, and what's the EPA, you know, regulation. So the significance of this color coding and those numbers are 400 parts per million is the EPA limit. You know, saying like above that, boom, you got to do something about it. But curious, 100 parts per million causes damage, is harmful. So it's like, what standard are we holding ourselves to? Not sure. So, and as you can see, we did this map. We translated this map for Dr. Milky into, you know, we called it the geography of lead. You know, so that you can see exactly what neighborhoods were in what kind of state. So this project. And also, these are probably familiar images to you of the unsafe houses, but also of the exposed ground. So in a lot of ways, it was a little bit perverse for us to talk about, like, let's go take care of that ground. Not perverse, but we were saying, there's the ground. Why don't we rebuild New Orleans from under, like below the ground up? And so we did. It was two-part. Pager was the project. It had two parts. There was Fundred that Mel was leading, and Difficult and Dirty was Big Mud, who was coming up with the strategy. So the first part, oh no, where'd it go? No. Okay, I'll have to just do interpretive dance on these. But Mel, brilliant man, artist. He made up this campaign called the $100 bill, because he basically said we came up with a budget, you know, of like $3 million to treat the soils on 86,000 properties. And he, what he did is he made up a teacher's like lesson with a dollar bill, with $100 bills, like, but they were $100 bills. And they filled them in, and they drew, I get goosebumps. I just got goosebumps because I wish you could see these. There were pictures of, you know, people up on top of the Superdome saying help, and oh, it's just, you know. But the whole idea was that they would make the money, and so we had like vaults all around the United States, and they made these hundreds of dollars, and I think they're still accumulating them to bring to Congress is asking for a direct exchange. We made this money, so we just were like being dumb about it, but working with the scientists again. This was actually, I should have listed him. It's Andrew Hunt. So lead, lead cannot be treated. You know, do not believe all the sunflowers that you see. No, just not. No, I mean marginal. Lead lead is a compound that, well, you could hog and haul all the soil away, or you can lock it in place, meaning you add something like the phosphate in this form of apatite 2 and becomes pyromorphite, which is then not bioavailable. So you completely change the chemistry and the properties of lead to not be toxic. And then, so our part, Dirt's part was what we call the big mud action, was to come up with a strategy of how would we move all of this material around. So, because the other part of it was that we block the lead, and then we put some clean sediment on top to just kind of be like super protective, but also good soil for planting.
Where did the lead come from? Where did these concentrations of lead come from?
The what?
The concentrations of lead in the landscape.
Lead paint, a lot from lead paint.
Wow.
Yeah, yeah, I know, amazing. But with the amount of old houses there that are continuously, going under renovation, and also lead comes out of wheel bearings in cars. But it was mostly the paint. Because there was just a lot of it, and the dry sanding, all that. Yeah, amazing. But also where the sediment came from is that the Bonnet Carey spillway, amazing. They opened up that spillway every so often in like 900 tons of, it's great. They call it sugar. It's a sediment. So we were like, because phosphate too. Now I'm going to be bad, but phosphate can also. We wanted to get it from the wastewater treatment plant. We're not without and the, well, whatever, anyway, biosolids is what we were after. And then we have the spillway. So we were like, shit and sugar, that's our recipe. So there it is, right? Just simply block the lead, add the sediment, and grow an urban canopy. So what we did is, to me, that I love when we hatched this plan. We wondered about how can this operation be scaled in many different ways, right? From you'll see from a wheelbarrow to a barge, and everything in between to just make sense for whatever neighborhood is being reclaimed. So you can see we went from extra large to extra small. And this is just an idea about how. And we came up with it, and I should probably add this here. We also came up with the characters who would be involved here, Army Corps of Engineers, the city, so at a scale, who are the, action figures at each scale. So, and then at this scale, the testing, job crew, training. Yeah. All right, number 4, I should get going here. I think you could probably tell that with all the digging around, that site histories really became paramount to our dirt design approach. We continue to work on, I still do, on toxic sites, but we also gravitated to, non-toxic, but still degraded, sites. Because there is such a spectrum. So don't think that you have to do contaminants to be doing good work. On even contaminated sites, there's a gradient, from maybe contaminated to pretty quote unquote benign, but probably degraded. And they're all different kind of technologies to deal with each bit of that kind of gradient. So I also, I have to say, we gravitated towards more of the manufacturing sites because we were really interested. I did mining sites for a while, and they're great, but there's not that kind of social kind of friction. And I have to say, this is when a way of working was really kind of kicking in that I call site forensics, is the way in which, just me at Urban Outfitters, of being able to kind of probe do a type of archaeology and kind of understand them, what I would have to work with. And I always say, for me right now, the primary act of design is finding. Always like finding, you know, and also kind of a fan of telling myself to always do this slow looking at a place. People are always in a hurry. Like, what are you going to do here? I'm like, you know, you'll see the project where I'm like, I don't know, I haven't looked yet. And I would say that this is where a form to me becomes more than site specific. It becomes site generated. It's all dependent on the reading of the site. And so what then has been guiding a way of working with site histories? I'd say have restraint, but don't be shy about it. I always, one of my least favorite words is sustainability. I hate it. It's just kind of like, it's lipstick on a pig. You know what I mean? It's like everybody, sustainable. Common sense, just common sense. And then this is a big one, and I do this with my hands. My client loved when I did this. He goes, Julie, give us a quote for the day. And I was like, let design emerge, not descend. Or you could do it the other way. Don't let it design emerge. A little project. I mean, this was like so much fun. This is where, you know, I work usually on such big stuff. This was 0.85 acres, less than an acre. But it was wonderful because I, you know, revisited how gardens are wonderful for experimentation. It was a client in a very affluent neighborhood in Dallas, and she rescued this pump house and waterworks, unbelievable, and just was like, what are you going to do with it? I don't know, but here it is. You know, this is part of understanding, and it's still there. It's incredible. These tanks supplying the entire water supply for Highland Park. And when I came to the site, this is what was there. This, by the way, I always like to point out my collaborator there, Kate Worth, on the left. And I just, you know, this is a case where I came and just was like, all that could happen here, all I would avoid doing is messing it up. Use that word, but you know, you just, I mean, you, how can you not just say done? It's like done. So it was just a matter of curation. And also just to kind of get an idea, this is one of my manic drawings, you know, of an idea of trying to really accentuate the voids of the tanks and the mass of the pump house by almost pulling up the surrounding landscapes like a blanket, you know, up to them. So because there's this beautiful, you know, bluff here, the limestone, you know, in the park in this direction. She's they're right here, living right there, and then the street, you know, and everything to kind of get that kind of mass and void really accentuated. And to, you know, prepare that ground, all of this concrete came up, right? So this was quite a day. This was a momentous day. The client came and I'm back there and, you know, by the pile. And I just said, I can say, Dee Dee, what would you think if we reuse all of this? I know this is commonplace now, but this was quite the question for a billionaire to ask. How would you feel about that? And she said, I love it, Julie. It'd be light on the side. Okay. So like, let's go. Here we go. The crew is laying down, and I use this name later, but the nickname for this material started here because I was on site and I'm like, you can't understand Spanish, but I heard Flintstone. And I went, Flintstone, and I went like this, I went Flintstone, and they pointed to it and they said, yes, Barney Rubble. Barney Rubble, there's Barney Rubble. Barney Rubble was born. And just, you know, lovingly put back down into place. There's structures here that I saved, they're kind of there and they're like, but I kind of like got on the floor and my knees to not have these structures taken away. Richard Serra moved in there. And the other thing we did is we looked at the plumbing, the old waterworks and the plumbing, and we just said how, would it be okay if we just re-plumb this and get the plumbing going and flow. And she was like, I'll do it, run the water that much, but yeah, let's do it. So this is the water filter coming down. It's kind of nice how it's getting quite a patina. And this is looking towards tank 2. There's tank 2 filling up. She's like, I would like to have parties for barefoot, I would like barefoot tuxedo parties or something like that. There it is. You only fill it. She only fills it up once in a while. About that. Just give that a minute. And then in back, there were other places where she said, I really want to, play with my grandchildren. So this was our secret bluff garden with a great tree down there called Eve's Necklace. And urban, a lot of what you'll see from my experiments in the garden at Turtle Creek showed up at urban. This is a great, I can't believe what a project we were given. Worked on it for almost a decade with all the different mazes. And you can see it's right on axis with Broad Street from downtown onto the Delaware River. It is in fact on the historic Lead Island. So it's we're talking history, really all caps, probably caps old. And this is a historic photo, but it's actually interesting how the character is still there. Like when you go past the Fleet Basin, there's still ships, decommissioned ships in there. And it's wonderful how it's just still got this kind of grit. And I always thought that it was kind of a really cool, weird juxtaposition, of the kind of craft of shipbuilding. And then the craft of clothes, that's Free People, if you know that brand, to the right. And just scale-wise, and actually, yeah. So these are massive buildings. I should be able to tell you how long that is, but I can't remember. But here's a battleship right here. So it was kind of cool that the battleship's right there. Anyway, so this is the initial part of the campus, and then they moved here. But you can see it has the classic, configuration of these long, linear, massive buildings. I always talk about how, I think I have the scale right, and then I add a 0 because it's not right yet. And there it is. I mean, whew, yum. So these are the kind of images, of course, I just gobble up. And that is, to see the giant crane way. Look at the crane, look at the size of that sucker. And there's a person, and then other kind of normal size, where they go off, and you just start to see this kind of arabesque flow, of the place. It's stuck. Something. I don't know, you're enjoying the arabesque. Yeah. Oh, should I do this thing? Yeah. Yep. Okay. So speaking of the arabesque thing, sorry about this kind of messy thing, but this also gets to the point of how we do action plans instead of master plans. This is me actually sitting down with Dick Hayne, who's the founder of Urban Outfitters, great well, he's a very difficult man, but a great collaborator. And you can see I just was falling in love with the rail lines. You know, it was this just beautiful sinewy way of because they always connected the buildings, so why not have them connect people through the new headquarters, through the campus. And that prior site forensics is really important, right? Because when I went to the site and we see this, you're kind of like, really? You know, but if you look closely, you see this crack? It's a track. You know what's under there? Yeah. So all of a sudden you're just kind of like, you get this X-ray vision and you begin to see, you know, what would be this kind of ordering device that would kind of help with the story and the scale and the flow. And I always point out that like this space designed itself. This was the headquarters and 3 people at the time. So you can see that right through there. This was like, well, this is easy. I don't have to do anything, you know. So, but you can see we unearthed the rail, and yeah, there's Barney again. Mark, you know, it was cool. It's so funny because it's like Dick Hayne, the head of urban, you know, I learned never to talk about anything environmental with him, ecological. Just like, I'm not going to talk about reuse. He called me outdoor one day. So I said, okay, never mind. I said, don't you love the way it looks? He goes, I love the way it looks. It's all the way it looks. And then, you know, I can't help myself. Sometimes I love to do little perverse things like frilly little cherry blossoms. You know? So, which a woman and 3 people said, you're the landscape architect. She goes, I am 25% happier when those trees are in bloom. Like, hey, great. Whoops. I'm glad. Okay, and then, you know, we didn't stop at Barney because, well, there's Barney, there's the landscape contractor who learned to love Barney, but we also were like, well, we got to have more of the Flintstone family in here. So anything that were smaller, of the concrete, the brick, the asphalt, like I'll show you. Anyway, it's not. Barney isn't as easy as you think. It's actually an art, you know, to make it look like it's intentional. And this crew just like had it down, and it's just super lovely to work with them. They like the cherry trees. And so Barney took form in many ways, like just, you know, just recycled, crushed concrete or wild and woolly stuff. Just came in around other stuff. The landscape contractor was great. For instance, I mean, this is a small detail, but he didn't cut down the grasses in the winter. I was like, thank you. You know, we just like, there was just this, I mean, I'd say it was so wonderful when, you know, someone else at Urban Outfitters said to me, they just say, we feel like this place has been here forever and now I'm a part of it. Pretty great, huh? I always do this thing like, I remember Dan Kiley, landscape architect, would show stuff that was really kind of incidental, and he would always say, I designed that. I get credit for that. So I'm like, I get credit for that. I had no friggin' way that was gonna happen. No, that was gonna happen. So of course we introduced Betty. So Betty was brick, asphalt, and concrete. And here you're seeing that this is a graphic I did not show Dick Hayne of the amount of material that did not go to the landfill. I think we estimated that we were at 90% reuse. And in fact, in one phase, we were importing debris from elsewhere on the Navy Yard. Early photo of trees on the west side of the building to help with solar gain, but that's Betty at the base there. And anybody know the redhead?
Wilma?
Wilma, that's Wilma. There she is. Yeah, and just to talk about more phases. I mean, again, it's like you don't have to design anything. That's recycled steel walls. All different seasons. I like to think of it as a runway. It's an anthropology. This is the opening day. It was a real interesting thing when we got to the phase with the dry dock, which is this most historic dry dock, #1 it's called center of the. I had to really carefully talk with Dick Payne about how to have that landscape not feel overly privatized, so that it really felt like it was, as it should be, the heart, the public, the shared heart of the Navy Yard. So it's nuanced, it's not easy to do, but I find myself a lot working on almost defending the public realm. And I just like, something would happen and go, so it's working. Everybody from around the Navy Yard comes to dry dock. And I love quiet moments like this. So we always call this the sweet spot. Okay, last piece, you guys, fallow matters. This is the thing that I've become obsessed about lately. I've become actually really interested in the neighborhoods that are around industrial sites. I mean, industrial sites are wonderful, I love them. But I realized, oh my God, here is talk about collateral damage of all of these neighborhoods that are depopulated and just, again, collateral damage from lost industries and lost jobs. So, and I have this thing where, and I've worked with my students on studios where we change the vocabulary and the attitude towards these. They're not allowed to say vacant. They need to say open or spacious. Not abandoned, it's available. So it's like turn that frown upside down, and think about these landscapes as latent, idle, in a good way. And because fallow, my brother, the journalist, gives me a hard time about using fallow, and I just say, the definition is that it's intentionally left to be idle so that it would resprout with its next evolution. But I have to say, in what I've been experiencing in Detroit is how many these developers are like carpetbaggers coming in and buying all this cheap land and redeveloping it for really no benefit of the few old Detroiters that remain. So this is this is a great artist. I use photographers a lot to try to communicate something about these landscapes. And I just kind of wonder about how it is possible to pose an alternative and one that could create new growth that is authentic and equitable. And how these types of urban wilds and tough parks assert their place in neighborhoods where they could be valued as novel ecosystems and cultural touchstones. So my mission is to see optimism and to see the fullness in the fallow. Let wilds keep us civilized and bring the neighbors along. So And again, the students that I worked with were, really working on this new vocabulary and actually a new way of thinking about this this is actually the neighborhood and this is Fong Lee's work, where she was trying to find, the openness and kind of how to make that a legible figure rather than this kind of like, empty ground. So I love this. She just was like, this is like blue, it's blue poured in, and you start to see, which I've been talking to this really incredible young developer I've been working with, is this whole idea, which some folks have talked about, are almost these intense urban cores and archipelagos, in this kind of figured landscape. Duh, it's a park system. Duh. So here's an ending project too fast. Core City Park. And you can see that it's got it's quite spacious, as my client says. I live in a spacious neighborhood. I love that. And just so you can see its boundary, and then you can see one of the first kind of catalyst, I would say, or this kind of inaugural park is Core City Park, right up there, surrounded by the other type of industry that you find all through Detroit and other industrial cities, of more like 1 and 2 story. There's thousands of those. I mean, the megafauna, like Ford, but it's all of those that are embedded more in the neighborhood. So I've just grown to just love them. So there it is. This was the space between 3 buildings there, right along a very busy thoroughfare, Grand River. And so this client calls me, this guy calls me, Philip, and he was like, man, we were like just kind of checking each other how to name it. At one point he said, because I'm thinking of Core City as a park. Who are you? I just was like, what? Yeah, and he's the one who said it's a spacious neighborhood, and so anyway, we got along famously, and I arrived on site, and he did, I think, what a lot of clients do, but anyway, we were standing there, and he said, what would you do? And I was like, well, I don't really know. And I said, but I've got a hunch about where we might start. And I said, there was a firehouse there, right? And he said, yes. And I said, when was it raised? And he said, 70s. And I went, 70s. I was like, isn't it the time when they used to push stuff into the basements? So I said, And so I turned to him after I thought all this, and I was like, dig. And as soon as I said that, I regretted it, but he had a backhoe there by the end of the day. He asked me to stay for a couple more days, and off we went. And so basically it became an archaeological site of seeing what we could see and let it emerge. And there's Philip on a very lucky day. We couldn't believe it. One day, up comes the backhoe, and there's the cornerstone of the goddamn fire station. Do you believe it? He was, oh my God. And I'm sitting there going, yeah. Holy shit. Oh, he was so thrilled, because I just, like I say, the park then just like gained 100 years old plus, I was like, and oh, he tells that story all over again, and all these people are like, what's 1893? And he loves that. He tells a story about, he goes, most designers might have put that up on a pedestal and put it somewhere, but no, Julie said, just
Back in the ground.
back to work, get it on the ground, So a little pug can look at it. So other littler pieces became terraces. This is opening day. Philip chose the canopy tree. He wanted honey locusts because they're very iconic in Detroit. And I said, okay, then let's have the petticoat of the iconic understory of dogwood. But you can see then that's black slag, crushed black slag. And I wanted to make the point here, I threw this in for like students' sake and others, I guess, that this is probably the only drawing I did along the way, and it was just to record. We did no construction drawings, just no drawings. I mean, it was luxurious. I mean, it was wonderful. I got to spend time there. We drew full scale. I got to know, the contractor got to know me. He knew what he was doing, but there it is. There weren't supposed to be any pink. They were mislabeled, but I was like, oh, whatever. This is when, it's kind of like, you just go, whatever, okay, great. Again, the landscape designs itself. And when you are thinking about other stuff that maybe you need to report, the great thing is that they stockpile everything from all of their projects. And these were sawn out walls from a vault, and I'm like, boom, I'll take it, like, okay, right across the street. And they're just, oh, I'm sorry, oh, that's really weird. Anyway, go sideways, you can have, they just quiet 2 people there, or just people pile onto it and they dance on them. It's a pretty happy space. And it can be somber. And of course, it's got to have snow. And this is another one where I'll take credit for this snow pattern this way. And there you see it. And it is indeed, a catalyst. I'm actually going next week to work on the next series of landscapes with Philip.
Does he own the land, or is he just like a community guy is like doing this like pro bono for the community, or does he own the land?
He says landscape first, and then I do buildings.
That's cool.
He's like, drive up, why don't I drive up the value of my land by building, and my units by building the landscape first. Who is this guy? I know, it's
Clone him.
yeah. Oh, I'm trying to get him, believe me, out there, as much, he's gonna be, the brownfields folks asked me to come lecture, and I said, only if I can do a duet
Fantastic.
with Philip. So I wanted to end here to acknowledge my role model, the late Cornelia Overlander, who donned a hard hat until the age of 99. She's kicked ass. And I'm indeed a proud recipient of the Overlander Prize, now following in the footsteps of this amazing. And reflecting on my work, I remembered how my early research took the form of a pretty life-changing cross-country trip, visiting a lot of ugly duckling landscapes. You can see this is exactly 30 years ago. So I will soon be looking and feeling tough sites across America, and every mile I hope I will spread words of courage and optimism with Cornelia in tow. That's it.
No, we do this as soon as we recorded it, so. They could hear it. Fabulous. So thank you, Julie, that was wonderful. Questions from the chat, questions from the audience? Leave it up to the audience first.
We're late, were we?
We're late, but that's okay.
I just had one question,
Mhm.
which is in Tennessee, what caused the defoliation that the community came to love?
Oh, what causes defoliation is the copper ore goes into a roaster and gets basically, you know, boiled down to the valuable ore. So those gases that are released are what kill the vegetation.
Holy cow.
Yeah.
And does that have any, ingestion issues? with
Oh, sure.
Breathing that in?
Air pollution is a tough one. I'll admit I've never addressed it. It's a tough one, you can't get after those particulates very easily.
So the communities you've seen, including the coal, you probably saw with your own eyes then the effects of living and working in such a close proximity.
Yeah, and it is where, you'll hear, read health reports about, asthma and all sorts of lung breathing problems. Yeah, I saw it.
Because that one photo that you showed with the 4 homes on stilts or
Yeah.
where they were with
It's
topography, it was.
It's mind blowing, isn't it? Yeah, it's surreal.
It's sort of sad, other than you're coming sort of to the rescue, so to speak.
Yeah, I always feel kind of strange about that, and I try not to. I don't wear a cape, going there. And I just, it's basically a lot of questions about, how they feel living there. And that's where it was actually surprising to me to hear from the folks in Ducktown that was the landscape they were accustomed to, that was their home. And they just were like, they didn't want it to be an unhealthy landscape. They wanted it to be healthy, but they were just, you don't have to fuss as much as I think people think they have to fuss.
Thank you.
Don't plant some trees.
Have you worked on any highway remediation projects? I feel like highways are kind of the new industrial site,
Yeah.
and there's a big movement to cap highways. I'm sure you're or maybe you're familiar with the Clyde Warren Park in Dallas.
No.
So there's a segment of highway that bisects Dallas. It creates an urban canyon, and TxDOT was coerced, kicking and screaming, into capping the highway, and it has created capping it.
Oh, it's under.
Yeah, so most Texas highways, especially as they go through cities, are below grade.
Yeah.
Significantly below grade. And so this Clyde Warren Park in Dallas, I think no one could have conceptualized how popular it is. And it's part of a movement across the country to either remove highways that have red line, they're scars of the red line, or they have bisected cities. But it is really interesting, and it's kind of the new industrial site. And I just had wondered if you had been involved in any of those projects.
No, I love infrastructure, but I think it's kind of baffling and maybe too big and not probably as
You can't get into the dirt.
visceral and as I think I'm prone to. Yes.
Thank you for your presentation and for coming to our university. Wow, you are right on time. My question is about your Flintstones.
Yes.
A very practical question. Do you find that in application, they require any kind of special plants, any kind of special planning? You're on site, you're busting them up, you have these piles. How do the plants receive that high level of, is that a part of your alkaline formula?
Yeah, I mean, Yeah, I've always been conscious of the alkaline, content, so careful about what's there. Haven't had any issues to date. But I also, as you were asking about that, I know it's like all concrete is not created equal, so I can't just, do Barney everywhere. It's part of the archaeology to see, what it will be like. And then if it's all uneven, you have to talk to a contractors are completely baffled. They're like, what? You want me to, and you just liken it to stone and just say stone is different thicknesses and, you teach them how to put it near, root balls. And so you just, it's funny. It's this kind of overlooked, undervalued material that you then have to kind of talk to contractors and your client to valuing and treating the same way, as a more valuable material.
I was just fascinated with the way you recycle it, because this whole idea of hauling materials off, when people get excited about remediation, restoration, they're excited. And it takes a lot of capacity. As we know, the environmental causation keeps happening potentially in remediation. So this idea of keeping these materials where you found them is genius. I applaud you for putting it out there. I'm sure it's ambitious, but it's, again, time.
Well, I do have to say it's kind of comes at the very beginning in the conversations with clients and communities, because I've learned that, you really need to talk about, your approach and your values and, all of that. Because I have to say, how are you with the idea, and I will ask them, how are you with the idea of keeping as much of this on site? And it's interesting, because, I've learned to ask that from the get-go so that you don't meet this resistance later and go, oh crap, it's not working. So it's actually kind of a nice dialogue at the beginning of forging this relationship with clients and communities. It's part of the trust building.
Well, I think you're not just kind of reusing it, you're transforming it. That's what I think is a pivotal part of it. It's not, you're not just kind of putting it back the way it came, but you're taking it and changing it and then re-envisioning it and so there's a depth there that is it's not just.
Yeah. It's really tricky to do, I have to say. I've learned, I have had some projects where, as much as I can tell a contractor how to do it, it's just be like, it's plopped down and it's not being transformed, so it's kind of understated kind of craft, that you have to become more evident and practiced.
Yep, Richard Wilkie in the chat says, thanks, Julie, I very much appreciated the presentation. Finding the beauty of a forgotten landscapes is a critical part for restoring them to the useful space. There are no questions. And then Dave Gifo says, yes, inspiring presentation. Really good here.
Great. Thank you so
Okay.
much.
Thank you.